Today is Tuesday, October 2nd, 1990. I'm John Anderson, and the guest on this program today is Miss Margery Aber, a retired faculty member from our music department and Suzuki program. In fact, the founder of the Suzuki program here at UWSP. Margery came here in 1967. In fact, we were in the same class, Margery.
Right.
And she came here pursuing a second career. She had just retired after 30 years with the Detroit school system. But what she did in that second career has been phenomenal. She really has put Stevens Point on the map in more ways than one. So it's a pleasure to spend this time today with you, Margery.
Thanks.
Tell me, you had gone to Japan the summer of 1967,
right,
between those jobs, to just see what this Suzuki business was all about?
That's right.
You weren't sure about it?
No, well, I'd heard the children play in Detroit, and they were so marvelous that great lumps of heart were in my throat, because I never heard children play like that. And certainly the children I had, my students, weren't even a tenth as good. And so I was very eager to investigate and find out whether the Japanese had more tricks or whether they really had something. And I found out they really had something.
Had Dr. Suzuki accompanied that group to Detroit?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you meet him there?
Yes. No, I didn't actually meet him. The thing that happened was that he gave quite a lecture about peace and how important it was that we in the United States should know something about peace and help develop peace in the world. And I thought, what's he talking about? We didn't start that war. And then after I got to know him, when I went in '67, I found out that what he really was doing is saying world peace is important and there should be no more wars or conflagrations anywhere. And we could do it by having little children understand, have sensitive and respectful beings, that they would know when their mother needed to have the dishes done, that they didn't have to be yelled at to do them, but they would understand that there are things to do. And somehow the way his students played the violin, and the cellists too. There weren't very many then at that time there in Japan, but the way they played, it was akin to what you hear of the greatest artists. And so I wanted to be a part of something like that.
How long did you spend with Dr. Suzuki?
Only 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
But the group was divided. There were about 50 of us, and the group was divided into 3 parts. And I was fortunate to have asked for Matsumoto, which was where Dr. Suzuki was. So every morning I heard his lectures and was able to speak with him. And then in the afternoons he took us out to various places in a radius, I suppose, of 100 miles to various student teaching arrangements. And so we saw not just the students that he had, but students from all around Japan that were all equally fine. And of course he has all of his teachers come once, or as many as can, come once a week to have him lecture further. So they're always growing. And that's part of the great thing about this whole method, is that teachers must always keep improving, and not only as musicians, but as human beings, that we become a better example. We must be an example musically and in our character.
This whole idea was so, not contrary, but so different, the approach to teaching. How did other teachers respond to it when you came back and told them about it?
Well, when I came to this campus, it was when I was interviewed for the job, which was before I went. The questions were, can this happen for trumpet? Can this happen in some other area? And I said, I'm sure it can, but I don't think it's been developed. And the music department was very much aloof, I think, to it. whereas the laboratory school people were very excited about it. And I think this is true even yet in some communities in the United States and other places too. It proves itself, however, that the children, well, for example, in our public schools here, there are some very fine teachers in the public schools, and yet the situation of teaching in class groups is different. And so it seems like the best students that they have are mostly Suzuki students who have had individual training in sometimes group sessions.
It seems like early in the program that one year when we had the Summer Institute, we invited in some press people, and a woman came from the Milwaukee Journal, I believe. And it seems as though the article that she wrote was trying to make the point that this program was one that was very militaristic. Do you remember that
No, I've
approach
forgotten.
to her article?
I know we had some criticisms.
Yes. How would you respond to those criticisms that you did have? There certainly weren't very many criticisms, but...
Well, another criticism was that no one knew how to read. And we don't teach reading until it depends on the teacher and on the students and their desires and their ages. But they can when they're in book 4, for example, they start reading and they become marvelous readers, excellent, and just as fine as anybody. But as far as militaristic, isn't it great that we have such fine discipline with our students and that they enjoy the security which discipline gives them? So, I mean, I don't think of this as being a case of being military at all. It's just a case of we help to make a child desire to play and desire to do something and feel very good about themselves. Their self-esteem is marvelous because they know they've achieved something.
When you came back from that trip to Japan and when you started here that fall, did you immediately start incorporating that Suzuki method into your instruction?
Oh, absolutely.
You did?
When I look back to those days, however, 3 weeks of studying something and having it very intense was great, but what I've learned from continuing to study and from continuing to see, because I've seen Dr. Suzuki many, many times since then, and worked with him too, which has been very nice. But no, when I first came back, the assignment was to have, I think, 2 hours a week in the lab school, and the rest was all in the music department, conducting and violin teaching and whatnot. And it didn't take long. I mean, the first week I was here, I sent out notices to parents saying, no, I tested all the children in the music department, all the children that were taking, well, it was up through 6th grade, tested all those children to see if they had 5 fingers and whether they could sing in tune. Now that's in opposition to what the Suzuki program, we think everybody has potential. But that's the way I started. And then there were 21 children who said that they were interested in taking lessons. So I sent a note to each one of those 21 children, to their parents, suggesting that they had to rent instruments or buy them, and they had to buy records and listen to them, and that the parent had to come for lessons too. And that the children would have, we arranged that they should have two lessons a week in groups of, I think there were 21 children in all, and we had them all in groups of 4 or 5, something like that. And then they met twice a week for individual lessons, but when we say they met in groups, they were maybe 4 or 5 in the group, but those 4 or 5 each had an individual lesson in front of each other, and so they kept learning from one another. And would like to, I'd involve each of the children, even though they weren't performing at the moment. And then once a week we met 14 together for 1 hour, and then the other 7 met another hour, and those were called their group lessons. And it wasn't long at all before they were playing. And of course, what I enjoyed about this was, having already taught 30 years, was that there were no pressures that I didn't have to have a program by such and such a date. So many times in the public schools system, I would have to have a program ready for a certain date, like in October, and then the next day we drop that music, put it away, and start on this. Well, with these children, I could stay on the one problem that they were having. If they didn't know how to hold their bow, well, we could concentrate on bow holds until they had it right. And so there was no remedial work. It was all forward motion, and that was a marvelous thing.
Well, it took a certain amount of supporters for you to get this program really rolling the way it did go. When you look back, who are the real instrumental people in helping you get Suzuki started in Stevens Point?
Well, of course, Hugo Marple was the original person who hired me, and he hired me partly because of my interest in the Suzuki program.
In the music department.
In the music department. And then, of course, John Pearson, he let me have all the, do as I pleased. He helped support we got more instruments as time went by and things like that. But outside of those two, and of course the teachers within this school were very helpful in letting kids go for their lessons when they were supposed to go, and that was great too. Hildegard Kuss, Betty Aller, Betty Johnson, and others. It was wonderful. And of course, what's the name of the kindergarten? Phyllis Ravy. She was also very helpful to me. And at that time, there was a fellow named Bill, and I've forgotten his.
Dick.
No, Bill Dick was there, but there's another Bill who was teaching the voice part. And he also was very helpful to me. But outside of the school here, Bud Egan and Mr. Radke, and let's see, I have, Paul Kelch, which he was the one who scared me into whether I would succeed as far as the American Suzuki Institute is concerned, because he said, you will have 175 people on May 15th, or forget it. We'll disband it right now. But Radke supplied me with $350 egg nest money and didn't ask to have it back, And then Paul Kelch said, well, I didn't know how to make out a budget. I didn't know how to use a secretary. In fact, I didn't have one until almost the time of the Institute. And those people, all of them, whenever anything happened, Mary Williams was another one, very, very supportive. And then, of course, the most supportive of all was Dreyfus. Lee Dreyfus said, you are a department unto yourselves, and you don't have to report to anybody. Well, I think when I look back, I should have been reporting to the dean and saying, well, I'm doing this, and what do you think? But I went my own way. And fortunately, my own way worked out all right, and no one was upset.
Now, you started the Institute in 1971, and that's the first year that you conducted the summer gathering. How many came that first year?
I think there were about 350 enrollees, plus parents. So I suppose if you counted all of them, it would be about 700 people on campus. But the actual participants, there were more children than there were adults, faculty. There's 21 faculty, I recall, but there were quite a few persons who came to learn what this is about, string teachers and college students.
Well, it certainly snowballed, didn't it? It was the first one of its kind in the country, and it grew very rapidly.
First one outside of Japan.
Japan, yeah.
Yeah, it grew, I would say it almost doubled by the second year, and every year we had 350 to 500 people more until 84 was, of course, the top-notch one as far as numbers are concerned, because then we had just 12 less than 3,000 enrolled, plus the parents, and sometimes grandmothers and grandparents too, and other children. So yes, it grew tremendously in those 14 years that I was in charge. And in 76 we had a large enrollment also. But I think that the average, and I'm not sure about this, it could be found out, but I think the average has got to be around 1,500. And I think that's somewhere where it stands now too.
What was it about the chemistry between you and Dr. Suzuki that was such that you became such very, very good friends? And
I think that if you think about the whole atmosphere of why parents wanted their children to come here, or why people took the lessons and so on, and around the country, but especially here, I think that large number came because, and this may sound crazy, but I think there's a spiritual need among people, that they felt a need for something better than they've been having. And the only way I can put it is that it's a spiritual thing. And Dr. Suzuki, even though this method is not any kind of a religion or anything like that, it still is, his book says, nurtured by love. And so if you're nurtured by love, I guess that's as close as you can get to a spiritual feeling, isn't it? So I think that the fact that he worked so hard to give children something that's for them, that's special, and of course his whole idea is to bring peace, as we said before. And if children can be sensitive to others, and they do know what love is, know what it is to respect others. Well, for example, when you have the children, part of the philosophy is that you don't have competition. Well, if you take 4 children in a little room like this, and each one's in the same piece, and then one passes the piece, so-called, that you'd think that other child would say, wait a minute, I don't like him anymore. He's better than I am. And that isn't the way. It turns out that we feel very keenly that this one is doing the best possible for that person, and this one is going to do his or her best, and we all should be grateful to that for that improvement. And so it's up to the teacher then to help share that joy over anything, that the slightest little improvement. For instance, one of the things at the very beginning is that they bow, sort of an international bow. Well, if they're bowing, so is one better than the other? And the idea is that each of us, as we bow, is accepting something great in the other person. We have respect.
did you ever work with learning disabled or mentally handicapped children
Oh, yes.
in the program here?
We had a group of 8 children here one summer, that were from Texas, and they had a lot of problems. But before that, help me with the name.
Rama Ditson.
Yeah, Rama Ditson
students,
had adopted a child who'd had a very terrible beginning in life. And when she asked me whether I would teach him, I said, well, of course I would. But I didn't understand his problem, what it is, but cerebral palsy. Now, I had no idea what that was. I hadn't heard the name before too much. And so this boy had to crawl up the steps. And he couldn't, when he was up on top, on the floor, he could walk fine, but he wasn't able to jump or do anything like this. So one of the things that makes me feel very happy about him is that in a matter of 3 months, he was able to put his violin, his box, we start out with a box, his box or his violin into the case with the right end in it, where he couldn't do that at first. But even more, because I didn't know any better, I would have them stand with their boxes under their arms, and then I would say, do everything I do, because a lot of our teaching is imitative. All learning is imitative. And so I'd lift up one foot, and he'd lift up his foot and fall down. And then we'd all laugh, and he'd pick himself up, and then we'd do it again. And in those 3 months, approximately 3 months, that boy was able not only to lift up his foot and keep his balance, but we were able to play follow the leader and jump over violin cases, and he could do it. And Dr. Suzuki has something in his book, Nurtured by Love, that says that he had a student with something similar to that, that every time the child would take a hold of a bow, they'd drop it. And so the mother would pick it up and maybe pick it up 1,000 times. Well, some time or another, that child was able to hang on to it. The muscles have to be developed so they can do these things, you know. And so this boy, Chris, was able to do that, and he was able to play a little. But he had a problem because of fingers. This is 1, 2, and 3. And to him, this was 1, 2, and 3 because the way he looked at it. And for him to put his fingers down and to lift one up was very difficult. But he used to attend the concerts. We had a solo recital once a month. And he would attend those concerts. And when he did so, he one day said to his mother, Rema, he said, you know, Mom, I don't think I'll ever be able to get up on the stage and do what those other kids are doing. But he said, I think that someday maybe I can have my name on this side of the program. So he could feel that he could compose. And he had a beautiful voice. But I had a letter from her a couple of years ago saying that he had graduated from high school with honors. So, and she always credited it to the fact that he had had violin lessons, and I credit it to the fact that she and others of us could love him and could respect him, you know.
Well, going back to 1967, when you came back from Japan with that group of teachers who had spent those 3 weeks with Dr. Suzuki, this entire country was a great frontier for Suzuki.
Sure
But
was.
you were the one who really tamed it more than anyone, I would suspect, because you got something going here that other people didn't quite match. Why did that happen? Why were you successful and the others probably started programs but didn't?
Well, there were other people who had Suzuki programs in their individual cities or towns, but the thing was that when I was in Japan, it seemed to me that we had been so, well, the word wouldn't be cruel, but certainly very poor in our understanding of how to teach. And when I saw 100 children on one side of an auditorium stage and another 100 on the other side, all playing and making the Bach double violin concerto so gorgeous that you couldn't tell that it was more than 2 people playing, that was an inspiration to me. And then long time before that, I'd had a sabbatical leave many years before, and there's a fellow named Joe Skornica in Milwaukee, and he used to have the children come every Saturday. And the way he to lessons, and he'd say, well, if you can see little oboe players, one oboe player in a school, then he feels pretty much like he's all by himself. But if he goes downtown and they're all 25 or 30 little oboe players all playing the same kinds of things, how exciting that would be. And so because of that, I thought, well, the Japanese children are wonderful, but they're no better than American children or German or French or any other children anywhere. They're all the same. And if they're all the same, then somebody has to be better than we've been, and that's the teacher. And that's the family, the home. The environment, has to be right. And so there was a dream that I had that someday I'm going to do this thing like Skornica does and invite people to come here to play together. Say these same little pieces, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and Perpetual Motion and the rest of the pieces, that they can come to one place and do that. But I was quite, unsure of how to go about this. And I didn't want to tell anybody that might grab the idea and run with it. And that's pretty selfish, isn't it? But then I had an opportunity, and especially I had a great deal of respect for Marvin Rabin, who is one of the most outstanding string teacher pedagogues in the state and well known all over the United States. And I thought, well, if he got the idea, I'm sure that would be goodbye to me from that. And I wanted to be sure that it went the way I thought it should be. I'd had the marvelous example of Dr. Suzuki's summer school when I was there, and so I thought that we should have something similar to it. And it's a story. Do I dare tell you all that story?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I arranged with a fellow in Madison that we should get 21 teachers from around the state who are all excellent together and have a meeting, and I'd like to talk to them about the possibility. The day of the meeting, this fellow called up and said, Marge, did you know that no one's coming to this? And I said, no, I was just going to leave and drive down there. Well, too bad. But he said, I'm really interested in what you're doing. This is a fellow named Wolf, Dick Wolf.
Is that with the DPI?
He's,
Department of Public Instruction?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, at Madison. So he said, let's make it a small group. And so he arranged for 5 of us to be together. And all the way down there I prayed that they would like it and that they would say, yes, it should be in Stevens Point, that nobody would grab the idea. But I had sort of crazy ideas, I suppose, because of the fact that, like I said, I don't have much idea about budgets. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if they would come for a week and they would pay $10 for their lessons for the week and plus room and board, and then maybe they could afford to come, because we don't want this to be an elitist thing. And so anyway, I told them all this, my high-principled, idealistic ideas, and they all agreed, said it was wonderful. What a marvelous thing you have in your mind. And so finally I said, well, where do you think we should have this? And they said, in Stevens Point. Oh, I said, well, I'd like that. But they said, you know it's going to go under. You won't make it financially for 3 years. Marvin Rabin said it'll take at least 3 years, so you'll have to convince somebody that 3 years of work before you have any money in your pockets. So I drove. And then there was the state superintendent, Lloyd Schultz. He was one of the great influences in this whole thing for me, because he said, this is so wonderful, you don't want to let go of it. Keep your eye on the goal. And he said, I'll help you get $1,000. And so then he helped me to get to the right person through the Arts Foundation, and then I got the $1,000. And then as I was working out all the schemes for it, he said, he'd say, call me up anytime, and he helped me make it so I'd write it correctly and all that sort of thing. And Orland Radke was another one. Orlin Radke and John Pearson. And I'm not sure if Bud Egan was in on that one or not, but they got together with me, and I told them, I said, well, I think $10 plus room and board. And they said, Marge, you can't do it. You have to pay your clinicians. How many clinicians do you want? I said 7. They said, well, you're going to have to pay your clinicians at least $100, plus their room and board, plus their travel expenses. And I looked, aghast. I didn't know I had to pay all that. That's a lot of money. To me, $10 was, quite a lot too. And so then they sat down and wrote down what they thought it would be the minimum amount that I could charge. And they said $40. And I thought, no one will come because it's too much. But the best part of it was that I went ahead and I made up a one-page, typewritten page brochure. And this brochure, I drew a star in the corner of it, a large star, and a little showing the sunshine of the star, the light, the rays of light. And then I put down, I think there was no more than 1.5 inches for the application. And then there was probably 3 or 4 inches for the people who are going to be on the faculty, and just a little more, just enough to tell them what it was about. And I had 1 ream of paper made out for that, that same thing. And then I went to a convention in Milwaukee, and I brought it down there, and I thought I can give these out to certain people. And I was on an elevator, and 2 fellows were on the elevator with me and another person, and he said, well, how are you doing, Marge? And I said, oh, I'm doing fine. I'm so excited. I said, maybe you'd like to see this brochure that I made up. And he looked at it, and I had put, one of the things I'd put down on it is this is sponsored by the American String Teachers Association. And he was the executive secretary. And he said, well, you haven't made out an application for that, have you? No, I said, I didn't know I had to, but I said, the president said I could do it. He thought it was great. And he said, well, do you have to have an application for this? And he said, you can't hand those out until with our name on it until you get that application. And I'll get you an application. So anyway, that's the way it started. Now you asked, I haven't answered your question actually, but the idea is that, and then when I called the faculty, and I think this is where the question gets answered, I called Louise Barrand in New York, and I didn't know her, but again, Marvin Rabin was my help, and he said she is marvelous. And he suggested other teachers, and we got the 7 most outstanding teachers in the United States to come. But when I asked Louise, she said, well, Marge, I was going to do that this summer in Maine. I had the same idea. But she said, you got it started, so I'll let you go ahead and do it. And then later, I tried to get someone that I heard about, Elizabeth Mills in California, and I said, Elizabeth, can you come? Well, I tried many times through the mail, and then I finally got her on the phone, and she said, well, she'd come if she could come part-time. Well, she and her husband and another fellow from California came, and they spent all their spare time observing, but this other fellow went around and observed everything about this university. He got the catalogs, got everything to find out what we had that they didn't have. And then they asked all sorts of questions, how it was organized, what we did, how we did it. So I said to this Elizabeth Mills, well, Elizabeth, you know what I think we should do? I think this is so important to spread across the United States. Why don't we try to develop, you have an American Suzuki Institute West, and we'll get somebody to have an American Suzuki Institute East, and one South and Southeast. And so we'll have 5 institutes. Then we can have the same faculty. They can travel from one institute to the other and serve everybody. Wouldn't this be great? So she said, yes, I think that would be pretty nice. So the next summer, she had American Suzuki Institute West. And then I was on her faculty. And so were others. And then, of course, I had invited Japanese faculty for our first institute. So she had Japanese faculty. And then about the second or third year, I invited Mrs. Kataoka, a piano teacher, to come over because then we could enlarge to the piano. And the first year we had a cellist who hadn't been to Japan, but she had been studying with John Kendall, who is one of the outstanding teachers in the country in Suzuki. And he had been on that original tour as well, and even had been to Japan before that. So this gal had her training through him, and so we had already had violin and cello, and then we also had semi-piano, but then we got Mrs. Karaoke to come to take over. So they did it, and with that, other teachers who came to our institute started one, only they didn't call it East. They started one in Ithaca, New York, and then pretty soon there was one in Southern Illinois, and pretty soon it grew until there were 60 of them. But
60. Are there still that many going?
Oh, absolutely. And the Suzuki Association of the Americas was formed here in Stevens Point. And if there's anything that's disappointing to me, it's that we didn't, and I should say I didn't, know enough to instigate this as the home of the American Suzuki Institute all over the country, because it should have been.
It's in Iowa, isn't it?
Yes. And it's good that it's there, but it should eventually come back home.
Well, certainly you had a couple of feathers in your hat for getting Dr. Suzuki here. Was it on two different occasions?
Yes, 76 and 84.
Did he go to other institutes in those years?
When they first started the institute, first started coming over to this country with a tour group, he went with the tour group, and then he saw that we needed training. And so he went around the countryside to very many places and did teacher training at all these places. And that was one of the places where Marvin Rabin, again, because of what he saw here before we had the institute, what he saw here made him decide that he would invite Dr. Suzuki to come to Madison. And when he did, then the only people doing Suzuki in the state, the only one was me. And so our students went down there to be the demonstrators, and because I had been doing a lot of what we call marathons, then he also had me do some teaching there along with Dr. Suzuki. So, that was pretty fortunate for me, because I was learning, and I was having an example to demonstrate. And I think that not only helped me, but it helped our university, because all these things we're telling everybody around that, Stevens Point has something special here, and we were special.
When you started the program here, certainly there were some parents and children that were more enthusiastic than others. Who stands out in your mind? What families were the real early?
The Trittons, of course, were very excited about it. John Klein's mother and dad were very excited about it. Shirley Gibb had a lot to do with all of her three children joined us. John Klein's brother came and took cello, and Laurie Tritton was the youngest one in her family, but she and John were so outstanding that they had a little inner competition, which is not the same as the outer competition, But those are the ones that the Summers boy. There was Summers. It's on the faculty here.
Raymond Summers in chemistry.
His his children were in it. Most all of their, well, not, they have 12 children, but
More.
more than that.
Yes.
But they had their children all continue to take, and Thurmeyer's children were very active in our program, and the Weavers. Mrs. Weaver took lessons for a while, and her husband took lessons, and then Virginia Liu and Matthew had 2 children that were in the program.
On the whole, the music faculty was slow.
Very slow.
In being supportive of it, wasn't it?
Very. Took years, many years.
Where do you think they're at now?
I think that we now have a chancellor and a dean that are tremendously behind us, and it's so wonderful, just a great thing. And they've just recently hired a violin teacher who actually was one of the Suzuki students here at one time. And so she's very supportive. She knows where we're coming from and where we're going to.
Was she here for one of the institutes, summer
Yeah,
institutes?
as a child when she was 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And she understands the philosophy, and she believes in it. And she is now working on a doctorate with the Vamuses, who have been here a number of years as Suzuki teachers.
Well, it's been fun to see how Suzuki has put Stevens Point on the map, and I think you sense it when you travel around the country and even beyond. Tell us a few stories about how people will recognize you, or some of the things about how people recognize Stevens Point and Suzuki.
What's the name of the former dean of education?
Art Fritschel?
Art Fritschel. Art Fritschel one day came up to me and he said that he was on an airplane going out to California, and he was sitting next to a fellow, and they got talking, and the other fellow said, "Where are you from?" And Art said, "Oh, I'm in a little town in Wisconsin." "Yeah, well, what town?" He said, "Well, you wouldn't know it." He said, "It's just a little town in the middle of Wisconsin." He said, "Well, where?" And he said, "Stevens Point." He said, "Stevens Point?" He said, "Well, I know that place. I go there every summer." And he said, "You know Marge Aber, don't you?" He said, "Well, she's the one that gets me there." So I always thought that was funny. And then I have friends who accuse me of not being able to go anywhere without someone stopping me. And so we went to Chicago to look at violins, and I was standing waiting for the elevator, and a bunch of people got off, and some lady whom I didn't know at all said, "Well, Margery." And I said, "Well, hi," just as though I knew her. Then she wanted to know all about everything and who was doing what and so on about our institute, because she had been there, but
You were trying to pretend that you knew her.
Yeah. So we walked out of that place, and of course my friend laughed because she said, "See, everybody knows you. Somebody knows you always." Then we went out of there and went to a different music shop. And before we approached it, there was a lady standing at the curb. She looked like she could have been an Indian, foreign Indian, not American. And she came running up and said, "Oh, Miss Aber." And I thought, what did I do? And she's my daughter. She said, "Will be so thrilled to know she's in there buying a violin with her dad, and I'm just waiting outside here for her. And we're so glad to see you. And what are you doing? And are you still doing the institute?" And it seems like not every place I go, but many places I go, someone recognizes me.
Well, now you've traveled to how many countries to lead workshops and do special lessons?
Well, I've been, I suppose the most proud I could be is that I have been selected to be one of the faculty members for the international, for a number of the international programs. So I've taught in Belgium, in Germany, Japan, China, Australia, Finland, Estonia, New Zealand, North and South. I guess that's most
Well,
of the
you've
countries.
forgotten a very important one. Weren't you one of the first people to introduce the Suzuki method in mainland China?
Yeah, I was one of the ones. And
I like that story because on that trip you took some of our couple of our local students.
Right.
Kara Schuler, I believe, was one.
yeah, and Liz Rohn.
And you took your dad, and he was at the time about 90. And
96.
he carried your bags.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah.
I carried the violin. No, he was 96, and that trip for the students was a wonderful trip. I remember that Karas, for example, was hearing the most advanced student playing Zigeunerweisen. I think it was Zigeunerweisen. And she heard that piece played everywhere we went, plus we were in Japan having lessons with Dr. Suzuki as well. And she heard that so many times that all of a sudden she was playing it. And she had never seen the music. But the ear becomes so great, you know. And so that was very exciting to see what learning she was getting from this.
Now, she's a good example of a student who really followed this through and has pursued music as a career.
That's
and,
right.
She's now with which group?
I think she's at Boston, not Boston Music, New England Conservatory as a senior. And she will be continuing with a master's degree, but she's done a little playing in England, and she's won prizes. She's on the way up. Very fine talent.
Can you think of other students from Stevens Point who have?
Well, this is an aside from what Liz Rohn is working on a medical career. I think she's starting her second year in the medical school, and she still is taking lessons, or I'm not sure about the lessons, but she's been continuing to play in orchestras right straight through. And you know, I think she just loves music. It'll always be a part of her life. Well, there's a boy right now pursuing a career in music down in Texas. His name is Orthman. I should think fast about what his first name is, but it'll come to me. And Corinne Brower Cook is now teaching in Michigan. She's married to a singer, but she's doing excellent work in teaching, just excellent. And San Lee is in New York, affiliated with both the School for Strings under Louise Barrand and also with the Manhattan School in some other school. She's working on a doctorate or PhD. And there's one of the things that Dr. Suzuki always has said is, students should be better than the teachers, and I have to say those students are they're better than I am. They can perform better. I don't know if they teach better, but they can perform more advanced works than I can now. And then Eric Lee, her brother, was one of 5 American violinists chosen to go with the American Soviet orchestra, which toured all Soviet Union, Russia, and in many places in the United States. And he is also seeking a career in music. He's down at Madison right now. And there's another fellow, Charles Bingham, who had been my student for a number of years and then moved away to Michigan. And I think that he is either a senior at Ann Arbor or is on his way with a master's degree. There are a number of very fine students, but our purpose, you know, isn't to have our students necessarily be professionals. Our idea is to give them a very fine musical education. If we can give them a splendid music education, then they're going to be the audiences, and they're also going to be the ones who play in orchestras too, community orchestras.
You started in your career as a young woman after attending Oberlin College. What prompted you to study violin as a girl and then to pursue teaching it as an adult?
Well, I'm not sure why I wanted violin, but when I was 9 years old, my mother sat the four of us children in the kitchen around the table, and she said,
This was in Racine?
in Racine, and she said, I don't think Santa Claus is going to be able to bring, I still believed in Santa Claus, so we all did, but he won't be able to bring us much for Christmas this year because he's quite poor. He has too many children to take care of. And so if you only could choose one thing, what would you choose? And so I said a violin. Now why I said violin, I have no idea, except that my mother had a midwife when we were born, and that lady had two girls. One was a pianist, one was a violinist. And it seems to me that one time when she stopped over at the midwife's house that I heard the violinist playing. Now I also know that that girl went to Europe. Whether I had grandiose ideas or whether I just liked it, I don't know. But I had a wonderful teacher, and that teacher, he helped to make me feel like I was good, and I think I probably was. And then when I was a high school senior, this is a terrible story to tell about myself, but I nearly flunked English. In fact, I should have flunked it. And that teacher went to the lady who was music supervisor of music in the public schools of Racine and said, I don't know what to do. She should flunk. But I had already been advised by this supervisor to go to Oberlin. And so they talked it over, and I remember their faces of very great concern about me and how I was a pretty dull student. And they decided that I should pass because otherwise Oberlin might change its mind. So I went to Oberlin and graduated from there in 37, and at that time, you're too young to know, but jobs were almost impossible to find. And the only two places I applied, one was in China and one was in Kentucky, refused me. And I had a chance to go to Detroit to interview. And again, this is a kind of a crazy story, but this Mr. Smith, Fowler Smith, interviewed me, and he wanted to know what I would like to really be. And I said, if I had a chance to go to Juilliard and study, I really'd like to do that. And I should have said, I would really love to teach. So he said at the end of the interview, I'm sorry, but he said, I think you ought to go on and pursue your violin career. And I went back, and George Mikell, who was the first cellist of the Detroit Symphony, said, how did your interview go? And I said, terribly. He wouldn't take me. And he asked me a lot of questions about it. And I said, well, he asked me all sorts of things like, who was the leading educator in the country? And I was so nervous I couldn't remember. And he said, well, I won't have any use for you unless you go straight back to him and ask for another interview and tell him that you want to teach the violin. So I called this Fowler Smith and said, he said, oh, there's no use talking to me. He said, I've already talked to you. I said, look, I traveled 400 miles to see you, and I was too scared to talk to you, right? And I said, I think I should be allowed 10 minutes of your time. So he gave me 10 minutes of time, and I said, look, you didn't ask me how I know the violin or whether I can teach it, but I know the violin perfectly, and I know how to teach. So I want the job, and you better give it to me. And he said, all right, you've got it.
And you stayed for 30 years. And
so I stayed for 30 years, and then it was after those 30 years, then I thought, well, I really don't belong had very wonderful orchestras, but it was such hard work to get children to play well, and it was always the competition with the band. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to teach at a university? And wouldn't it be nice if I'd come back to Wisconsin so I'd be nearer to my folks? And then this job came up, and so that's another story.
Well, we're glad you came back. Marge, there's a nice ending to this story. about 2 years ago, you became quite ill, and you your life even hung in the balance, so to speak, with it was a tumor, wasn't it? A brain tumor.
Meningioma tumor.
And you were taken to Rochester, and no one really expected that you were going to ever play again, did they?
Well, I couldn't move my hands or my leg or my shoulder, and it's a miracle that I came back and I can play as well or better.
What really motivated you to come back out of that?
Well, of course, my sisters were there all the time, and if they saw me getting a little low, they would cheer me. And I know that I had more than 200 individuals wrote to me from all around the world, many places around the world, and they all were saying that they're praying for me, and they all were eager to see me up again. So I think that was the biggest thing. I knew that if I couldn't play again, that I would find something else to do, but still, I wanted to play again too.
Well, and that was just a few months before your 75th birthday, and in March, I believe it was, you had recovered it well enough to celebrate that birthday by having a recital and doing a bang-up job, getting a standing ovation, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the house at Mickelson Hall that day.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a wonderful day.
Yeah, it was.
Well, Marge, are there some things you want to tell us that we haven't talked about today?
No, I think that the one thing I would like to reiterate, though, is that it was wonderful to have a chancellor who was so supportive of both me and of the program, and who helped, and people like Jan Weaver, who played the piano without charge for 10 years, always did all of our accompanying, and went on all of our trips wherever we played. And and of course, when I think about most of all, if it hadn't been for Dr. Suzuki, my life would have been much more humdrum. And this way, I've had so many opportunities that many people would certainly, one would just love to have the opportunities that I've had. And I just hope that I can continue to grow. As right now, we're doing a research, doing something to help children all over the world, we hope, through the research that we'll do to help make it possible for more children to study and to improve the teacher training and to improve all the facets of the Suzuki program. But again, we have to thank Dr. Suzuki, but thank the great power that's within us each to go forward.
The buzzword today is economic development. And I suspect that had Margie Aber never come to Stevens Point, there might not be as many hamburger joints up along the strip. There probably wouldn't be quite as many motels, because you have brought so many people to Stevens Point as visitors. And so I think there are a lot of people in the downtown who have appreciated your presence here too.
Just lately, the man who has the yogurt ice cream cones, I saw him and he said that he has more business during the 2 weeks that we're here with our institute than he probably has any other 2 weeks all through the rest of the year. There's no comparison. And that's great if we can serve our community and serve children. So the biggest thing is to serve children and their parents. So
good. Thank you, Margery.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.